Welcome to our weekly workshop. My name is Miha, and I'm in charge of customer success at DepositFix. DepositFix is a tool that helps HubSpot users receive payments online. And today I have the pleasure of introducing our guest, James Rendell, who is the head coach at Copilot Marketing, a marketing management lecturer and Australia's HubSpot master trainer. So thank you for joining us and for sharing your expertise with the community here at DepositFix. So I think we can kick things off and you can start sharing about what we're covering today, as well as share all the knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Miha. Really glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to today's session. I think we've got some great people joining us, and I know we're streaming through to the Facebook group, and we've got a few people joining us on Zoom. So I think it's going to be a great session. I'm keen to make it really interactive and to help in any way I can. I know we've set a pretty ambitious title here for the winning marketing plan, so hopefully everything that we cover today lives up to it. So we've got heaps that we want to get through, and obviously, as you can see here on screen, the title of today's session is the winning marketing plan. And what I want to do is run through a model that's going to give us the foundation for this. You know, as we said in the introduction on the registration page, what we're going to do is work through 9 sequential steps to help you build a winning marketing plan. And the key here is to make sure that you've got a system so that you can attract and retain more of your ideal clients. So if you don't already have something to write with, then grab that now. Let me give you a bit of background. As Miha mentioned, I'm the head coach here at Copilot Marketing. So we're a consulting practice that helps growing small and medium-sized businesses to then be able to set winning marketing plans. I do some lecturing in marketing, and perhaps more relevant to a lot of you here through the DepositFix community is I'm a HubSpot master trainer, which means I get to travel around and deliver HubSpot's flagship 3-day marketing workshop to clients. And I'm also a marketing certified partner. So I know a lot of you here using DepositFix also use HubSpot as a CRM. So once we jump into Q&A, if there's any general questions we've got about what we cover related to HubSpot or anything else that we cover, obviously we're happy to do that. As Miha said, we're really keen to use the chat today for our discussion as well. So what I'm keen to do is make this an interactive discussion more so than just me speaking to you for the next 45 minutes. So let's use the chat to ask any questions. We can answer them as we go. And also, if you find anything really useful, type that into the chat too. I'll post some questions and comments and thoughts as we move our way through the session. So using the chat's a really great way to make me know that what we've said has actually landed. And if we need to focus more on certain areas, we can, or if everyone feels like they've got a good grasp of those concepts, then we'll keep moving our way through. So let's jump straight into the topic in the session. So as we said, we're covering today the foundations for building a successful marketing plan. And the model that I want to work through is one that I developed called the marketing compass. So I'm going to bring this up on screen and we can start to go through it, and we'll build it out as we go. So I really like to start here. It's important that we set the foundations for this marketing plan. And often, a lot of businesses, they jump straight into tactics before having the grounding strategy. So this is the core and the centerpiece of this model. And it sort of looks like a propeller, really. And that's the analogy that we intended to have, because it's really what helps businesses to be able to take off. Maybe you've joined here today because you're not getting the traction that you need out of your marketing, or you're finding that you're not getting the results that you need. And often it boils down to a few key things. It's largely what we find, it's clarity and it's structure. If you don't have the clarity on what you need to do, and you don't have the structure to then make it possible, then obviously you're not going to get the sort of sustainable and cumulative growth that you're looking for. And typically businesses come to us after they've started in some form of marketing, or they've used an agency or tried certain forms of tactics, but they just haven't worked. And often it boils down to not having the right foundations in either of those two areas. So the model that we've got, one, as I mentioned before, called the marketing compass. And there's 9 sequential steps that really you need to be able to have in place before you jump into particular tactics. So where I wanted to start is to unpack normally some of the challenges and deficiencies that businesses have when building out their marketing plans. And then we're going to round this all out together. So what I tend to find is businesses jump straight into individual tactics much further into the model than perhaps they otherwise recognize that they should. And what we tend to see is companies starting often with lead generation. Now, there's some obvious reasons as to why we want to start with lead generation tactics before anything else. That's the lifeblood of our marketing. It's what helps us generate, future clients. But the challenge is we need to have the structure and the clarity around how do we actually do that in a way that's going to be effective. If it's not generating enough of the right types of clients, then obviously there's a missing piece in the puzzle. The other area that I tend to see businesses jump into and start with is their content marketing. So we'll call that a content strategy. Now, apologies for the bad handwriting. I've got a model a little bit later with some cleaner notes. So what I'd recommend is, take some notes as we go. Hopefully the spoken word's a bit easier than this bad hand. But the content piece, as I mentioned, is often another place where businesses start without having the clarity of ultimately what it is that they should be doing. So it doesn't matter whether it's writing blogs or creating videos or hosting webinars. If you don't have the clarity into really what type of content's going to resonate with your audience, then it's not going to land. So this is why we need to make sure that we've built out a compass. And really that's what the intention of this center of the model is. We need to have clarity around what we need to do and the structural elements in place so it actually becomes effective. And when we've got that, it's a foundation to grow the business. When you don't have all of these 9 elements that work together, what I often see is businesses get pulled in all different types of directions. You tend to end up listening to the loudest sort of voice in the room where someone will tell you, well, try this tactic or use this software, run this advertising campaign or do this particular thing. And the danger when you don't have clarity and structure in what you're doing is you ultimately don't have control. You're looking for some set of secret or magic formula that's going to get you there. But, often we like to believe that these things are possible, but the reality is they're just not. So what we need to make sure that we're doing is not wasting time or money or any form of opportunity in just the hope type strategy. We need to make sure that we follow a really methodical system to be able to get there. So that's what following each of these 9 elements sequentially is going to give us. So I'm going to go through now and start to build them all out. What I recommend is don't try and recreate the diagram. Just make a list, on a sheet of paper, 1 through to 9, top to bottom, of all of these 9 elements. And then what we're going to do in the back half of the session is go through an audit exercise. So we'll talk through where your business is right now on each one of these 9 elements, and I'll give you a framework that you can use to be able to do that. And then obviously we're happy to answer any questions that you've got as we go. So as I mentioned before, there's 9 components here. We don't want to start with lead generation and content strategy. So let's start to talk about where we actually should begin. And really, the first step of the whole process should be your targets and your budgets. Now, this might seem quite obvious, but it's surprising to me still how many businesses don't start here. And when I say targets, I don't mean these broad, overarching, top-level revenue type figures. We need to make sure that we're ultra clear about all of the specific targets that are necessary that help you arrive at that overall revenue figure. And if you don't have targets and budgets, then ultimately you don't have a plan. You've got more of a hope. I hope that this happens, or it would be great if we end up here. We need to make sure that we've got really methodically set targets that have been arrived at logically. So we want to start to build out targets on things like how many new customers do we need to be able to attract inside a defined time frame? How many leads do we need to attract to be able to end up with that number of customers based on knowing conversion rates? So your conversion rate should be targets. What component of new business do we need? How much retained business do we need? How much sales revenue do we need or new customers do we need in each vertical of your business? So it might be in certain product lines or certain service offerings. We've got to get really specific about the targets because once we're ultra clear on what we need, then some of the marketing activities can start to take care of themselves. If we think of targets as being a fundamental piece, then really its sibling is budgets. There's no point just having targets unless we're setting a sum of money aside or time or resources or some form of financial and time component that allows us to get there. So when we've got our budget set logically, that allows us to know how much it's going to cost to acquire each lead or how much it's going to cost us to acquire each customer, then we've got a benchmarking tool. We know what we've been able to achieve with a certain sum of money, and that becomes the foundation upon which we can grow. So if we know it's working, then we can start to sort of dial up the numbers and know that if we keep adding more money, does it give us the replicable results? And that's the scalability piece that we talked about. So we have to start with our targets and budgets. Once we're really clear on what they are, the next step is to make sure we've aligned our sales and marketing functions. So aligning sales and marketing. Now, often when I say aligning sales and marketing, people naturally assume that we're talking about having the sales and marketing team get along and not fight or, just be friends. But it's much, much deeper than that. We need to make sure that these two functions of the business are actually in alignment on what the shared goals that they have for the company are. And they're the targets that we talked about before. Number of new customers we need, number of, amount of sales revenue we need in certain verticals. You need to make sure that both the sales and marketing team are aligned on who does what and when. And the danger of when this doesn't work in unison is we end up with sales teams that aren't following up on the leads that we've generated, or they're not following up in the right time frame. So I like to think of this, if we think about a simple sort of interest over time graph. All your customers, as they go through their buying process, their interest in what you provide is going to grow over time until they enter what I sort of call the buying zone. We need to make sure that the sales team reaching out with these customers at the right time, because there's an obvious danger of moving too quick and there's an obvious danger of moving too slow. But if you don't have systems in place and agreed parameters between the sales and marketing functions as to who does what, then it just becomes a little bit hypothetical, and it's more a case that we'll make a determination when we've got time. Should we have a look at the interactions that our leads have to know when's the right time for sales to make contact? Because if we just wait purely for someone to pick up the phone and ring us, then we're missing an enormous opportunity. So we need to get really clear on those agreed processes, agreed systems, and those mutual responsibilities that marketing has to sales and that sales has to marketing. With that foundation in place, the next step is to develop what's called your buyer personas. If you're not familiar with that term, a buyer persona is the generalized representation of your ideal client. And again, the targets that we're setting back at the first stage of our process, they need to be around attracting your ideal client, not just anyone into the business. We want to make sure that we're focusing on people that we can actually help in a way that means they're going to stay around and be with us for a long period of time. So the buyer persona piece isn't just a broad concept around we support this type of business or we support customers in this industry. We need to go much, much deeper than that. And the reason why the term buyer persona is, it's about seeing the person. We need to really unpack the challenges, the frustrations, the fears, the wants, how they make buying decisions for the services that you provide. So whether that's in a business to consumer or in a business to business fashion, the buyer is still a person. And we need to unpack everything it is about their approach to making decisions for the services and products that you provide in a way that allows you to orient all of your marketing efforts to attract them. And that's really where the lead generation content strategy piece for businesses falls over. They're not ultra clear on those frustrations, the needs and the wants. So your content as a result becomes quite bland because you're not speaking specifically to anyone. And when you would try and appeal to everyone, all you do is you appeal to no one. So we are going to get ultra clear about who it is that you help. Okay? So this is a really important first foundation. As we said, we need to make sure we've got clarity on what we're aiming for in terms of the targets that we're setting, the budgets that we're setting, how we're going to align our sales and marketing teams on those same targets, and who it is that we help. And when we've got that in place, what it ultimately gives us is it gives us clarity for what we need to do next. And it also gives us a foundation that we can start to scale. Okay, and that's what gives us the growth. So in the create stage, we need to then be able to move forward into creating what's called the buying process map. So that's our buyer's process map. And the key thing that we need to unpack here is everyone goes through a buying process for every single purchasing decision they make. It might take a few seconds, it might take months and years. So whether you're organising somewhere to go out for dinner with friends, or you're appointing a new accountant, or you're buying a new house, we all go through a purchasing decision process. And if your business sells products and services which require a really considered decision-making process, one that's led by the research efforts that the consumer takes around getting clear on their problem, understanding the options available to solve that problem, and then who they're going to appoint as a supplier or the software they're going to use to help them solve that problem. If you don't have clarity on what that looks like, then you're missing an enormous opportunity to guide someone all the way through their buying decision process. So this is separate to the buyer persona research. We want to go beyond what their needs and wants and fears and frustrations are. So we're really clear on the questions that they ask and the thoughts that they have as they move through each one of these stages. And the obvious reason as to why we want to do that is the content that we want to develop and the lead generation efforts that we have need to be around meeting them where they are with what they need, not pitching a product before they even realize if that product's what they need. We need to make sure we've got content for each one of those buying stage processes. And when we do this effectively, it allows us to orient the sales process to us in a very natural way. If you don't do this and you're not there for the whole duration of their buying process, what tends to happen is you end up fighting with all of your competitors right at the end of that person's buying process. And I'm sure you've been in this sort of scenario as a consumer. If we put our sort of consumer hat on and we think about our experience when we go to buy something, once we get clear on what it is we need, our search behavior online changes. We'll search for different things on Google, or we'll ask questions in Facebook groups, or maybe you've ever noticed when you mention something close to your phone, targeted ads tend to pop up. That's when you notice you've moved into the realm that, geez, everyone's aware of what I want and I'm going to start getting sold to. And we tune out naturally as consumers, we hate being sold to, but we like solving our problems. And that's where we need to be able to position ourselves, putting our business hat back on. If we're the company, we want to make sure that we've oriented their buying process to us at every stage. So then the eventual sales process doesn't feel like we've then changed gears and we're now selling to people. We're just continuing to help them. And if you do that effectively, your conversion rates are much, much higher than if you don't. So that's the buying process map. Once we get that clear, all of the structural elements we need for our content strategy are making much more sense. But there's one final piece here, and that's what we call the value proposition. It's your promise to these ideal customers about the value that you provide. And your value, it's not the services that you provide. That's the mechanics. That's the how of what you do. The value is those problem-solving benefits that they get from dealing with you. And I like to use the analogy of this being your superpower. Once you get really, really clear of the unique value that you provide, which is different than all of your other competitors in the market, that gives you a mechanism to be able to leverage. It gives you a playbook that you can then use to attract the right types of clients. Because I'm willing to bet the perfect fit client that you have, those ideal clients, when I say those words, I'm sure you've got a customer that comes to mind, someone you think, oh, like John or like this person from ABC Corporation or whoever it is. Once you're clear on who that ideal client is, I'm sure they love you for your superpower. And when you start to narrow your messaging down around leveraging those superpowers that you have, what it actually does is it repels people that are the wrong fit. It allows them to opt out of the process. So the eventual leads that we end up generating are much more likely to be the right fit because they're resonating with the language around what it is that you ultimately provide. So once we get clear on what your value proposition is, we need to make sure that we live it in everything that we do. Namely, as that next step, our content strategy. And this is why we need to do all of these 5 previous steps first before we start content marketing, because now we're going to be much clearer in what type of content to produce, what format the content should be in. If someone's got particular thoughts and questions that they have and that they ask as they go through their buying process, you've got a ready-made library of potential blog posts, ebooks and webinar topics. That's why we have to go through this really considered process first, okay? So that gives us the foundation around our aim and then our create and allows us to move forward to executing really methodical and structured marketing plans. So we've got to think about the lead generation piece as being an extension of what we've already got in place, not just jumping straight into lead generation and trying to run some ads, okay? So let's go through, let's build out these last 3 stages, and then I want to check in and see where we're at, okay? So lead generation really should be the vehicle that you use by leveraging your content to attract those perfect fit clients and then start to nurture them as they go through their buying process stages. And we're going to use content as part of a value exchange. And if you think about any form of marketing or sales, everything that we do is some form of value exchange. Whether it's time for attention or money for products and services, we're trading something. What we're going to do here is we're going to trade your valuable content for the contact details of a lead in a way that makes them recognize we're starting a relationship and a discussion. So that could be by heaps of different forms. It might be literally a form on your website. It might be someone commenting on a post on social media. Maybe they've started a chat with you on Messenger or in LinkedIn or on live chat on your website. The mechanics and strategies for what you need to do in your lead generation are going to be much, much clearer once we've gone through all of these previous 6 stages to this point. So we're going to use our content as a vehicle to be able to generate our leads. Then once we've generated and we've nurtured these leads ultimately to becoming clients, we need to keep them. And that's the client retention piece. The last thing you want to do if we want to generate sustainable growth is have a revolving door. And I'm sure you've seen this where in your business, for whatever reason, and this is quite common, we tend to put our time and effort from a marketing perspective into generating new leads and generating new business because it's easy to take for granted that the clients that we already have are just going to stay with us. But sustainable growth comes from turning client retention of 12 months and 2 years and 3 years into 4, 5 and 6 years. That's what gives you a platform to really be able to model future growth and to also drive referrals from these clients. Again, your buyer personas, the people that we've attracted are the ideal fit. Once we're clear on who they are, they're going to hang around much longer because everything you do leverages those superpowers that we mentioned before. Okay, so we need strategies and tactics in place that allows us to increase what we call that customer lifetime value and set a foundation so you've got a client retention machine, one where people stay with you ideally forever. So I really can't overstate the importance of having good client retention tactics. So we've got 8 pieces already in place here. And if we do all of these things, we've got a tremendous foundation for building that winning marketing plan we spoke about before. So the key now, once we've got everything here, is to make sure we resource and implement the plan effectively. So that's resourcing and implementation. So once we know what content we're going to produce, what our lead generation efforts are, what are the needs and wants and fears and frustrations of our ideal client. Once we're clear on all of that, then we can start to build the campaigns to be able to leverage it. And in here, what we want to do is make sure we're operating in our zone of genius. The same way we want to leverage our superpowers in our value proposition, we want to make sure that everything we do from a marketing perspective is done effectively. So you might need to outsource certain functions. You might want to insource certain functions. We want to make sure that we're leveraging the right sort of tactics that are right for your budgets and targets. Now, if you've got a restrictive budget, then there's no point going and spending a ton of money on a big film crew and heaps of expensive video production equipment and software. We need to operate with what we have for what we need in this point in time so we can scale it down the track. So we need to make sure that anything we do in a resourcing sense leverages all of the available time and money that we have. And I'm a big believer that your internal team that you currently have in your business can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And then you find really selective elements that you want to outsource. So I want to leave us, before we jump into the audit exercise, with another important thought. Marketing is an investment. It's not an expense. And we need to make sure, if we're using our budget effectively, that we're investing in giving us the insights that are going to set us up for growth. So when we've done all of these 8 steps effectively, we want to make sure that we've put in place some monitoring and control measures so that we haven't just resourced our marketing plan, but we've implemented it in a way that gives us the learnings and teachings about what's working, what's not. How do we start to optimize this? The success that you get's not going to be, we've done this once and it's landed perfectly. It will be through trial and error. So we need to have monitoring and controls in place so we know what's working, why it's working, so we can leverage it. If something hasn't worked, how do we stop it, or make sure we set up another test so we can trial something different and make sure we get really clear on not repeating those same mistakes. So they're the 9 sequential steps that we need to be able to go through. And in a moment, what I want to do is give you a mechanism that you can use to start to audit your current marketing against each one of those 9 elements. But before we jump in and do that, I'm really keen to know, what's been most helpful for you to this point. Start to make a bit of a note and have a think on your, the sheet that you've got here. What's working well, what's not? What are some of the consistent thoughts I've had over the course of the last 10 or 15 minutes around what we maybe need to change or do differently? And if there are any thoughts or questions that you've got, let's drop them into the chat and we can deal with those now before we jump into the audit exercise. So I'll give you a minute just to do that while I clear my screen and get ready for the next section. Miha, maybe while people are doing that, any questions on your part? Is this helpful so far?
It's resonating with me very well. And actually, I would have had so much less of an imposter syndrome having also worked in marketing and listening to this. I think that the part that resonates most is structure, really also coming from a startup world. I think startups are maybe even too fluid, right? They just want to jump in and start working. And I guess a good question on my end would be how to balance, getting stuff done if you're limited with time and budget, as opposed to just sitting down and planning. Where would the middle path that be from your perspective?
In terms of how do we best use the available time that we have in an effective way to get results?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting point, and this probably comes back to, and I've cleared the screen here, but when we start to set up our targets and budgets, one of the budgets that you have is time. So that there's a component that you'll have, of money. So you're going to have a sum of money that you're allocating to marketing. Then there's going to also be a component of time. I mentioned a few times, operating in your zone of genius and then leveraging, your superpowers. We need to make sure that we do this across the board, not just in the content that we produce. So if you're more limited with time and potentially you've got a larger budget, then you need to be the pilot. You need to be the one that's flying the plane and giving the sense of direction and then resourcing out all of these other functions. So as much as you might like to generate content, if you've got a really limited amount of time, you need to be the one flying the plane. And then you can bring in engineers and stewards and all of these other people to take care of other functions. But you can't fly the plane if you're also, taking care of catering and check in and check out and all these other components. So if you're limited with time, do more of a conductor approach, a pilot. If you've got much more time, then work out what is ultimately your zone of genius. Where can you add tons of value into the marketing process, and then bring in the subject matter experts to then be able to, plug the gaps. But the key ultimately is you need to be the one that's aware of all of these components. you're going to have a compass, you don't want to be, as I said at the beginning, pulled off track. And when you're not clear on what to do, all you're going to do is then, someone runs an ad on Facebook that really speaks to you and appeals to you, and you think, oh, that's great, I want to go down that path, and you go down a rabbit hole and find out, oh, that's not really what we needed. All you end up doing is ebbing and flowing, not really getting anywhere. So you need to still be the one that's aware of what's our compass. Is it effectively working? Do we know what we need? And then that's why I leave the resourcing component till the very end. You don't want to start thinking up front, I'll just get these people to do all these different types of things, or you're doing speeding up the mistakes.
Yeah,
does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah. So just being in that pilot seat, I think, is the answer, right? You don't want to go down a rabbit hole, which is a mistake I think a lot of start-off entrepreneurs do, right? They want to do everything, or they just get pulled in so many directions, whereas you need to stay in that center. So yeah, that's valuable.
Brilliant. So I mentioned before what we wanted to do is jump through an audit exercise. So I want to use a traffic light system to help us to do this. So really what we want to do is we're going to go through each one of the 9 elements together. And what we want to do is in the sheet of paper that you've got, I want you to mark beside each one of these 9 components, one of the 3 following colors. So we'll start with red. So if you're going to go and mark something as red, then really what you're saying is it's pulled you up. You're at a standstill in this stage of your business. You don't have clarity on what you need to do. You need to find a way to get going again. So if you're red, basically it's brought you to a stop. If you then decide we're going to mark something as yellow or amber or whatever you want to call this middle color in the system, then really what it's doing is you find that you've lost momentum, really starting to slow down, and eventually it's going to pull you to a stop. So you're somewhere in that middle ground. Whereas if we're going to go ahead and mark something as green, then really it's working quite well in your business. It's not slowing you down and you're good to keep going. So we're going to use that red, amber and green color code system to give you a framework to identify where are the challenges and pain points that I've currently got, and what do I need to address first if I'm going to have that calibrated compass that gives me clarity on what I need to do next. So we're going to go through each one of the 9 stages, and as we go, I'm going to give you some suggestions for what sort of indication will determine whether you're going to be, red, amber, or green. So I want to start with the setting targets and budgets. So what I'd suggest is if you have a documented marketing budget and you've got documented sales targets at the level of what we spoke about, so you can track your marketing performance metrics to a level where you know how much it costs to acquire a lead, you know how much it costs to acquire each customer, and you know what those customers are going to be worth to your business over the duration of their lifetime, then that would be green. If you don't document your marketing performance and you don't have defined sales and marketing budgets and targets for next year or the year ahead, then you'd mark that as red. If you're somewhere in between those two, then that would be amber. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick some colors as we go for what I tend to find represents most businesses. And I want you to do the same. So here we're going to say that this area is amber. So aligning your sales and marketing. If you've already documented out systems and processes, which outlines what the sales and marketing functions have agreed as the classifications for what a good fit leads, what a bad fit leads, when we do sales outreach, what sales responsibility is to the marketing team and what marketing's responsibility is for the sales team. If you operate with that level of structure in place, then that's definitely green. But if you don't have any of these documented structures that are clearly understood by both sales and marketing, so any of those outreach efforts are sort of, we'll make it up as we go, or we'll make a judgment call on a case-by-case basis, and you don't know really what constitutes good fit and bad fit leads, then that would be red. And again, if you're somewhere in between, that's going to be amber. So just so I don't end up being all too negative and putting red and ambers everywhere, we're going to mark that one as green. But again, you'd mark yours based on where you're at right now. And it's probably an important point for me to mention. It's better that you're honest with yourself than you just try and, give yourself a compass full of all these green elements. The reason why you've joined today and what's attracted you to be part of this session is clearly it's something that we want to be able to improve upon. So let's get clear on really where those pain points are. So we'll do the same thing with our buyer personas. If you've got documented and then research-based representations of who those ideal customers are, and it outlines to a level where you're clear on, the demographics, the role, the goals, challenges, frustrations, buying processes, all those relevant traits we spoke about, so that you can market to your buying, your buyer persona, those ideal customers. If you can market to them effectively and get results, then that's what will determine if you're green. If that classification of your ideal audience is a bit vague or it's broad, such as, we serve this industry or anyone in this geographical location. If that's how you've defined your buyer persona is, and maybe you've got a buyer persona document, but it's just been put together with some instinctive gut thought rather than research, then that's going to be red. And again, if you're somewhere in between, that would be amber. So I tend to find a lot of businesses now, they've built out buyer persona documents, but really it's been hypothetical. It's been something that they've treated as an exercise they can do inside a couple of hours. So if that's you, really challenge your thought on where you sit. Then we want to flow over into mapping and being clear on that persona's what we call a pre-purchase process. So not the process they go through as a customer, everything that leads up to them becoming a customer. So if you know what each one of those stages are to a level where you're clear on the questions that they ask, the thoughts they have, and you can orient that buying process through to you, then that would be great. Where if you tend to find that you're not clear on the specifics of that buying process and you tend to orient a lot of your marketing activities right through to someone that's in that decision stage when they're really ready to start buying, then that's going to be red. And if you're in between, that's going to be amber. And I tend to find even companies that have their buyer persona documents, they haven't mapped out that buying process. Next piece is building and living our value proposition. So if you've clearly outlined all of the value that you provide to your audience in a way that's specific to the benefits that you provide and the solutions to their problems, so that you can then leverage all of those known elements in your marketing. So you've got a really full range of benefits and solutions, which creates consistency to your marketing, then that is going to be great. If you don't have any of those elements in place, and as a result, you tend to find that all of your messaging is a little bit generic, or you find that it doesn't land, then that's going to be red. And if you're in between, then that's going to be amber. I tend to find, businesses have some level of awareness of what their value is, but they haven't specified it to a level where there's really clear and concise messaging. So the next piece then is developing out our content strategy. And we've mentioned this, and I keep referring to this right up front because it's the area where a lot of people put their time and effort. The question I'd ask here is, if you've already set goals for your content marketing campaigns and you have confidence that you can achieve them because you know what types of content to use, what assets to develop, and the sort of result that that's going to generate for you, then that would be green. Where if your content marketing efforts aren't really tailored for that buying process stage, and you tend to find that you're not getting traction with the content, it doesn't move the needle for you, then that's going to be red. And if you're in between, that would be amber. I tend to find, despite the fact that a lot of people are actively engaged in content marketing, they don't get the results they're looking for because they don't have those mechanics. So then the lead generation piece is an extension of that. If you've got tactics and systems which generates the right sort of traffic to your website, then it converts your visitors into leads, and you've got a mechanism to use content to nurture leads into clients, the number of clients you need to hit those targets we set up front, then that would be green. Where if you're not getting enough traffic to your website, or you're not converting enough of the traffic you already have, and as a result, you don't have the volume of lead generation that's allowing you to hit your targets, then that would be red. Again, somewhere in between would be amber, and I'm going to mark that one as amber. So the client retention piece, really what we're trying to identify here is if you retain your clients for a period of time, which means that the amount of money they spend with you covers all of your marketing expenses that went into acquiring them, and then generates enough additional revenue and profit to then allow you to grow, then that's what you'd mark as green. Or if you don't have systems in place to actively address any service delivery issues you have, or mechanisms to really enhance relationships and drive loyalty, then that's going to be red. And if you're in between, that's amber. Even though there is quite a lot of room to grow, I tend to find that of all of the components here in the marketing compass model, this is where a lot of businesses do have results. So the final piece of the puzzle, as we mentioned, is that resourcing and implementing plan piece. So in your business as it stands, if you have the human and the technical resources that allows you to execute marketing plans, it doesn't matter whether that's internal or external, as long as you've got people that can leverage the right level of expertise to deliver, the resources that you need, and then you've got mechanisms to monitor and control that performance of the plan, then that's what would signify, green in this case. Whereas if you have systems, but they're limiting you in some shape or form, or your mix of internal and external team members don't really operate in that field of genius that they have, and as a result, you don't get good results, or there's poor controls in place, then that's what would signify that as red. Again, if you're in between, that's amber. I tend to find, and often probably the reason why you've joined and looked at this section, is that's one area that you particularly need some help with. So when we have a look at our marketing compass model and you look through all of the color coding systems that you've used, the obvious question that you need to ask from here is, how well calibrated is it? Do you feel like all of the components surrounding the clarity element tell the truth about where you are? Do you have clarity in what you need to do? Do you have the structural elements in place that means you can actually generate some growth in your business? So if your model's mostly green, or it's mostly amber, or it's mostly red, then it's going to start to tell you a pretty consistent story. So the question that I'd want you to answer now is, what color ultimately dominates your compass? give that some thought for a moment, and then we can jump in and talk about some next steps. So Mia, just while people are making their notes and having a bit of a think about where they're at the moment, what was most useful for you in that traffic light and audit exercise? What were sort of the themes and thoughts that you had as we went through it?
I guess it's the holistic approach to seeing, your overall performance. And actually got me thinking. So sometimes having a customer success support background, I think when it comes to content, especially, you said that's often read, right? And content is often generic. I think there's a disconnect between the marketing team and the people actually talking to the customers. So the marketing team only has an abstract idea about what the end user is, really. So do you have any suggestions on how people can improve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, the reason why that content doesn't land and doesn't resonate with that ideal audience is they haven't gone through a very considered and best practice approach to building out their buyer personas. So what I tend to find is people become familiar with the idea of buyer personas. And HubSpot as a business has done a fantastic job in championing the importance of the buyer persona piece. And the really hot topic around any form of marketing for the last 5 years has been that idea of customer centricity. So I think a lot of people are aware enough to the fact that they need to do it, but there's a deficiency in how they go about it. They might find some form of template online where they fill in, what are my customers' needs? What are their wants? What are their challenges? And literally they sit down and top of mind for them, they start to write those out. The challenge is once you've been working inside a company, you're blind to the actual realities, and you've lost the capacity to see things absolutely objectively because you just know too much about what your company provides. So you see it through a completely different lens. Whereas if you've gone through and followed the right approach to building out your buyer personas, you would have leveraged the insights from your internal team and also those of existing customers and prospective customers. So there's a really considered approach that you need to be able to take in building out your buyer persona so that you are ultra clear. And that's in that traffic light exercise. As I said, a lot of people feel like, that their content works or they've got a buyer persona. The reality is those last few steps, and it's like all things, all of the success happens, in the last 10%. If you're ultra clear on what those needs and challenges are because they're the reality, then that's what allows your content to stick. Otherwise, if it's a little bit general or vague and it's not as if you're speaking to someone specifically, then it's just, they're going to tune out and it's going to be seen as bland. So the reality of it is they haven't leveraged enough of the real insights as to the challenges that their customers are actually having at the moment.
That's helpful, yeah, definitely. Also, what I learned is sometimes it's also good just to talk, even if you're in a marketer position, right? So, go down in the trenches and talk to people. I don't know if that's your experience too.
Yeah, well, it's finding whatever mechanisms you have to get your hands on those insights. I often advocate for a lot of my clients in marketing to go and spend some time working in sales and customer service, doing the same thing in a reciprocal fashion. And that's the whole crux really of the second component, that aligning the sales and marketing. We need to make sure that there's a really clear channel of communication between both functions. So we're seeing emerging trends because of the questions that people are asking the customer service team or, what people are asking the sales team about in terms of products and services. We want to, as a marketing team, we want to know that as soon as we possibly can because we want to start to either find ways to communicate those benefits or make additions to our product and service suite so we can tap into those emerging trends. So why don't we do this? Happy to keep going through, and I know there's probably some questions that have come through to you directly on chat, and if you want to relay those through to me, then happy to answer those. And if anyone wants to ask a question directly to me, I'm happy for them to sort of unmute and jump in and do that. I know I mentioned to you up front, and I could spend all day and literally, I often spend, 60 days working through this sort of framework with a lot of clients. I'm more than happy, to be able to continue this discussion with anyone that feels like they need a little bit of extra, help and guidance. So what I'm going to do literally is just sort of write up here a place that you can go if you want to have a direct chat with me and brainstorm out one-on-one, some tactics that you can employ or maybe some challenges you've got. Your compass might have more amber and red and you want to have a chat about that directly. So feel free, I'll write this up here, to book a time directly in my calendar for a quick chat, and I'm happy to have a discussion with you to continue the discussion of what we've covered today. So the place I'd like you to go to is copilot.com/game plan. With a dash in the middle, co-pilot.com.au/game plan. If you want to jump there, that'll redirect you to my calendar, and happy for you to book in a time for us to have a chat one-on-one, and I'm happy to provide whatever guidance and support that I can.
Speaking of content, do you also have a blog or any other places that people could visit to learn more?
Yeah. So if someone wants to jump on literally just to, our website here, so copilot.com.au, we've got online workshops and some resources and materials. So if you jump on there, I've got a longer version of what we cover here today and some audit exercises that people can follow. So if you want to jump on to the website, there's some tools there, and connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Facebook. I often tend to share a range of different resources there, and happy to connect with anyone that feels like I could offer some guidance and support.
Sounds great. So I think it's Q&A time, or is there anything else that you're hoping to cover before that?
No, so happy to jump in if there's any. And as I said before, I know there's probably been a few direct questions that have come to you via the chat. So if you want to relay those through to me now, or if anyone's there and they want to have a direct chat one-on-one, happy for them to unmute. We've got some time available now, so let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. So
it looks like we don't have anyone on Facebook. I wonder if anyone here on Zoom has any questions. So if you do, just go ahead and unmute yourself, and I would love for James to answer the questions.
Seems like it was a very extensive presentation.
Yeah, and I think Miha has been asking lots of questions as well, so that's been very useful. Any last parting words, James? Looks like we don't have any questions.
No, look, the last thing for me, I suppose, would be just I hope people have found this useful in being able to orient their marketing activities. As I said, we set up front what's the required components to building a winning marketing plan, and for the last 5 years, I've worked directly with one-on-one with a number of businesses, product-based, service-based, B2B, B2C, across a broad spectrum. Even though I tend to do a fair bit more work now in the service space with B2B companies, I tend to find that the challenges and the frustrations and the barriers that companies face, they're ultra consistent. Whether it's it's $1 billion company, or it's a startup, it's a family-owned business, or it's a national enterprise, the frustrations and challenges that they have, they're ultra unique. So if someone's starting out on their journey, or they're part of an internal marketing team and they're not quite sure about where to go from here, I'd absolutely encourage you to go back and have a look at that marketing compass model and think your way through each of those 9 components. Because all of the success that I've been able to help customers generate over the last 5 years and beyond has been in following a methodology which ticks each one of those boxes. So all I'd suggest is, if you come here today looking to find some ways to be able to improve your marketing, go back and look at what you're currently doing through the lens of that marketing company.
I second that. It's a very, very solid framework that you have there. And just how generously you're sharing this knowledge really proves you understand the value of content that you're sharing. So it's really been valuable for me to listen in as well. And
yeah, my pleasure. As I said, I'm a bit of a self-confessed marketing nerd. I love this sort of stuff, and because I know that it works, I'm really happy to share it in a way that someone finds really useful. And as I said, if you want to have a direct chat with me one-on-one and brainstorm some ideas, the URL is still up on the page, so feel free to book in a time. Otherwise, hope to see you on the next workshop that we run.
Awesome. And James is going to be one of the speakers for a couple of upcoming summits that we are hosting, DepositFix host. It's actually going to be full summits later in February, and then another one is April. All of the people that are on our list for DepositFix, we are going to notify you about that. But James, I'm really excited about the session and look forward to chatting again soon.
Yeah, it's going to be good fun.